Hello and welcome to Colred Plays Raid Shadow Legends. I am Colred. Thank you for joining me. In today's video, I'm going to give you my review of the new January Fusion champion, ZINOGRE Blademaster. And then we're going to take a look at the fragment event calendar so we can plan our way through this January Fusion event. So whether you need a little help deciding whether or not to go for ZINOGRE, or you've already decided to go for her and you're just looking for some insights into how to plan a successful Fusion event, this video's got you covered. I hope you're ready for it. Let's get started. Just a quick reminder, if you could please hit the like button for this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and consider joining our Discord community. All right, now let's get started here on ZINOGRE Blademaster. Now, she's a pretty cool looking champ. This is one of the 5 champions that are part of the crossover, or I don't know what you call it, collaboration with Monster Hunter, the Monster Hunter franchise. Now, all of the Monster Hunter champions basically hunt a specific monster, and that monster gives them their name. So the ZINOGRE is a type of monster, and this champion, who's basically like a player character, is a Blade Master, obviously uses blades, that has defeated a ZINOGRE and then outfitted herself with weapons and armor based on components, I guess, of her defeated foe. So she's wearing the, the hides, she has the fangs or claws or whatever that have been turned into blades. So in terms of concept, it's pretty cool. I like the aesthetic here. Definitely has a little bit of an anime feel to it, I think, which is fine because that's sort of the style of the Monster Hunter games. But now let's take a look at her stats and her kit. Now, her base stats are fine. I don't see any glaring weaknesses here. Nothing also jumps out at me as particularly strong. It's a nice base speed of 104, but not overwhelming. Good attack, but again, not overwhelming. Decent HP pool for an attack-based champion, but again, not overwhelming. So for a legendary, I would say average stats. All right, now let's take a look at her A1. Her A1 is a triple hitter. Has a 30% chance of placing a 25% weaken debuff for 2 turns. You can see this doesn't book into additional chance to land that weaken. And this is only one chance, 30% chance of landing that weaken. This feels like a very weak A1 to me. It's a good A1. Like, it's a good version of an A1. It's a triple hitter with a weaken on an A1. That's nice. It's always good to have A1 weaken champions in your roster somewhere. It's always good to have triple hitters on their A1 in your roster somewhere, but this is a relatively weak version of this. In terms of landing a weaken, there are epics who have a much better chance of landing a weaken, and there are also champions who have A1s who I think are triple hitters who are at least as good, if not better, than this A1. This is a fairly disappointing skill. It is a 3-hitter. I've checked the multipliers on her. Her multipliers are good, but not outstanding, so I don't think this is going to do a ton of damage either. But it's an okay skill. It's a triple hitter, basically. If we look at the A2, we have a quad hitter here. Quad hitters are always nice. This books down to a 3-turn cooldown. Each hit increases this champion's turn meter by 5%. So that's a 20% turn meter increase. It doesn't have to be a critical hit. It just has to be a hit. So this is a nice skill. This is going to improve her overall output in terms of speed, getting back around to her cooldowns faster. This also places an increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns. Again, this is on a 3-turn cooldown. I think this is a relatively strong skill. The multipliers on this are good. This will hit decently hard. So this is probably the best part of her kit right here. This quad hit with the extra turn meter fill and increased speed. Now, if we look at her A3, this is another quad hit. It says before attacking, places an increased attack buff on this champion for 2 turns. The first and second hit each have a 100% chance when booked of landing a leech. The third and fourth hit each have a 100% chance when booked of landing a decreased attack debuff for 2 turns. So increased attack, leech, and decreased attack, which is not bad. The multiplier on this skill is pretty good. So this will also hit decently hard. But what we're seeing here is all multi-hitters, all single target. So right now I'm thinking boss killer, right? Especially Fire Knight, maybe a Fire Knight specialist, but might do well against other bosses. The leech makes you think clan boss, and the decreased attack makes you think clan boss. The weaken might make you think clan boss. But the problem here is that her multipliers aren't phenomenal. She doesn't ignore defense, and she doesn't bring like so much overwhelming damage that I think she's actually going to be a great clan boss damage dealer. I think she'll be okay. In the early or mid game, I think she could stand in as a pretty good clan boss damage dealer. Remember that you will need accuracy on this champion in order to get the value out of her weaken, out of her leech, and out of her decrease attack. So those are 3 good buffs for a clan boss champion. But again, that's going to require more stats in terms of accuracy, which may take away a little bit from the damage that you can get onto her build. Additionally, this is not really an unkillable clan boss damage dealer. This would be for a traditional team where the decrease attack and the leech matter. So if you're just looking for a weakened champion, you can find better weakened champions. But if you do not have an unkillable composition yet, I do think that she could do a pretty good job in bringing some really good debuffs and providing a bit of damage for your clan boss team. Now, she also has this passive, and I'm not sure exactly how well this passive is going to work. Hey folks, Future Colred here, and I just wanted to jump into this video and make a correction before we got too far. I had an interesting discussion with members of my Discord community about ZINOGRE's passive, and I think based on the language that we're actually seeing here, her current HP shouldn't matter. I was just talking about how I didn't think the passive synergized with the leech debuff, but in actuality, what may be happening here is that once she loses health, the counter on this damage increase starts up and it never goes down. Meaning her current health doesn't matter. It just matters that she's taken at least 50% of her HP in damage over however many turns that she's had. Once this multiplier is applied, especially with the decreased defense, you can basically double her damage. So her effective multiplier is going to be roughly a 12 times multiplier. That would make her amongst the hardest hitting direct damage dealers in the entire game. In fact, she may be a top 5 clan boss damage dealer if this ability is working the way that I suspect it is. Now, I am not on the test server, so I can't confirm this myself, but hopefully one of the content creators in the next day or so will confirm that that's the way this passive works. But as a result, like for the rest of this video, you're probably going to hear me call ZINOGRE about a B tier champion, but that was based on a misunderstanding of her passive. With that passive working the way that I now think it does, or with me now understanding the way it works, I have to say this is potentially a god tier damage dealer. So if you can go for her, I would highly recommend that you do so. All right, I just wanted to make that correction before we got too far into the video. Thanks so much. Now back to the regular video. And then she has this aura, increases ally speed in dungeons by 30%. I actually think this is a great part of her kit. There aren't that many speed auras for dungeon. And in fact, the largest I think is Ray. She's got a 33% speed aura for dungeons. So 30% is a lot of speed in dungeons. And we already know that ZINOGRE looks like a Fire Knight specialist. Triple hitter, quad hitter, quad hitter. So I think that you could use her in normal Fire Knight up to stage 25. She's going to help you clear that really easily. But I also think she's going to be good in Fire Knight hard, because you can make her your lead, your aura lead, and that's going to allow you to alleviate the stat burden on all of your other champions. And she's still going to help you break the shield with those quad hits and with that triple hit A1. Now, she's not going to have any turn meter reduction for normal, or obviously she doesn't have any freeze for turn meter reduction for Fire Knight hard. So she's more of just a shield breaker and then some extra damage. The weaken may help a little bit if you can land the weaken. Again, it's only a 30% chance. Yeah, so I think that she's got a little bit of a self-contradictory kit. The debuffs are going to require accuracy. That's going to take away from her damage. She doesn't have an ignore defense mechanic. So she's going to want to be stacking as much crit damage as possible, and then using her passive to get even more damage, but her leech kind of interferes with that. So I don't know exactly where she would go other than Fire Knight. I do think, like I said, you could use her in Clan Boss. It's really the sort of the early and mid game. I don't think she's your Ultra Nightmare Clan Boss damage dealer unless you have a very specific comp. There might be a comp out there that could work. I do think she'll be good against bosses in general, so you can use her as a boss killer in most dungeons. Definitely against Dragon, I don't see why you couldn't do that. And probably against some Doom Tower bosses as well. All in all, I think this is an average fusion. I don't think she's great. I would probably give her about a B grade, maybe a B plus. I do think, though, that's a little bit misleading. Maybe I shouldn't just give her a single grade, because I think as a specialist, as a Fire Knight specialist, she's going to be like an A plus champion. You know, so I don't think she's going to be god tier anywhere. I don't think her damage is going to be enough to like boost her into the stratosphere. But there are a couple of considerations in terms of going for her. One is that as a Monster Hunter collaboration champion, she is exclusive. So if you don't get her during this fusion, you will never have a chance to pick her up in the future. She will not drop from shards, and she won't be available from any other sources. So if you like the Monster Hunter franchise, you may want to go out and get this champion, even if maybe she doesn't add a ton of utility or skill set to your roster that you don't already have. One other thought is they may buff her in the future. I really think that this A1 needs a buff. That should be 30% chance on every hit, and they may make that change in the near future. We've seen that recently, that sometimes champions get buffs even in the midst of their fusion. We can hope. We can hope, because I think if that changed, all of a sudden that would bump her up quite a bit, because having a weaken on an A1 is always a good thing. And this would actually be landing then at about a 65% rate if this was a 30% chance per turn. So I will be going for this champion on my main account, primarily because she is an exclusive champion. I don't really have FOMO with this champion, but I will want to do content with her potentially. And so I want to make sure that I get her on my main account. I have decided to skip this fusion on the Noob versus Pro account. I do have the materials necessary for this fusion event, and I was planning on doing it on my Noob versus Pro account. But instead, I'm going to be kind of revving down, or I don't know what you would call it. I'm going to be idling my Noob versus Pro account for the time being so that I can focus on the HH Gaming Free-to-Play Challenge for 2024, which is actually starting tomorrow. And I will have another video later in the day talking more about that. Okay, so let's move on from the review here. Like I said, if you've decided to go for, now we need to take a look at the calendar. And this actually may also impact, if you're still on the fence, this calendar may impact whether or not you decide to go for this champion. Okay, so here is the calendar, but I do want to show you something. I'm going to take myself off the screen for just a moment. So you can notice down here, the extra fragments are back. That's pretty great. We haven't had a lot of extra fragments in recent fusions, and those extra fragments have been tricky to get. Okay, so with 15 extra fragments available to us, and that's without the tournaments, remember that's without the extra fragments in the tournaments, we can actually plan on skipping at least one event out of this calendar. Now, it is a relatively short calendar, only January 11th to January 24th, so it's going to be relatively intense in terms of playtime. We also don't know what the point totals are going to look like in each of these tournaments and events, but based on the recent past, it feels like this is one of the friendlier calendars we have seen in probably 6 months to a year. This is actually maybe the friendliest calendar we've had since 2022. So let's talk about skipping 15 fragments. Which fragments are we likely to skip? So there are two things that you can do, I think. One is you can try to save shards, and two is you can try to save something that's not a shard, basically. So silver or energy, right? Now, there are 15 points available in this summon rush that is starting tomorrow. You could potentially skip this summon rush entirely. Now, there would be a reason to do that. One reason is we typically do summon rushes with sacred shards, but there is a 2 times sacred event happening on the weekend of the 19th, 20th, and 21st. So what that means is you could potentially save a lot of sacred shards here on the summon rush, have them for your champion chase tournament right here, and then pull those sacreds during a 2 times event that's also happening during the champion chase. That's a lot better resource management. We would love to not have to spend sacred shards during this summon rush. So I think that might be a really valuable approach for most players who feel like they have the time and resources to complete all of the other events here. Remember, you need the silver, the energy, and most importantly, the time to complete all of the other events, because this would be the only one that you would be skipping. Now, alternatively, we could skip the Champion Chase tournament. And the benefit of doing that is that the Champion Chase tournament happens in the second half of the fragment event. And so this way, at least you'll have a better idea of whether or not you're going to need those fragments. What I mean by that is if you skip the summon rush here and then you fail anything else, you're just done. You've lost your chance to get any extra fragments. However, if you complete the summon rush now, and then you get to the champion chase, you can decide whether or not you're going to need any of the fragments from the champion chase tournament because you'll be much closer to the end of the overall event. Now, one thing to remember is that both of these events, the summon rush and the champion chase tournament, will probably have 2 different rewards. So they're going to have a 5 fragment reward and then a 10 fragment reward. So you could also say do just 5 points on the summon rush or just 5 points on the champion chase. You could skip the summon rush, do 5 points on the champion chase, and that would still potentially allow you to miss one of the other events or tournaments on the calendar. And I think if you're not going to skip the summon rush, or you're only going to skip some of the points in the summon rush and the champion chase, you have some options about where else to save those fragments. Now, it's going to be hard to skip this champion training event because that is 15 fragments. So that would be the only thing that you could skip there. But again, this is probably broken up as well. It might even be 3 rewards of 5 fragments each. I don't know. Or it might be a 5 and a 10. But this third Dungeon Divers down here is probably the least efficient event in the entire calendar. So that would be the one that I am looking to skip, assuming I'm doing the summon rush. Okay, so I'm going to kind of give 2 different alternative plans here. The first one, I think, is if we are just going for the summon rush, we're going to assume that we've prepared properly. We're going to think about maybe skipping the champion chase tournament at the end, but we want to have our fragments lined up so that we can kind of take advantage of the flexibility in the second half. So the Dragon Tournament is going to line up with the Dungeon Divers event and the Champion Training. You want to try to triple dip here by having a solo or duo in the Dragon Dungeon who can also grind up some food for the Champion Training Tournament. You're going to put all 2K energy there into the Dungeon Divers event, which of course takes 5K energy. And you may in fact decide, where else you're going to put that in. That's the only tournament. So it is going to take 5K for this Dungeon Divers event. But you're going to save 2K because you don't have to worry about that energy for the Dragon Tournament. Now, you want to make sure that you skip the first day of the Ice Golem Tournament. Don't do this because this lines up with the second Dungeon Divers event right here. And so you want to make sure you put your 2K in right there. And then what I would probably do is also do the Fire Knight. You can see the Fire Knight for 1 day is going to overlap there. And so that's going to allow you to save all the energy on the Fire Knight. So you're going to need 5K here, but it's probably going to be, 2K from the Ice Golem, 2K from the Fire Knight, and then just 1K in the middle. And then that means that this Dungeon Divers on the end, the only thing that you can squeeze into that is going to be the Spider Tournament. So you could do that, and that would give you, again, 5K, but the Spider Tournament would be covered. So all 4 dungeon tournaments can be covered by the Dungeon Divers events, and that would probably require you to pull in maybe 16 to 18K energy overall. That's not too bad. That's not too bad. When you get 100% coverage from your tournaments, that's good. Now, that being said, we don't necessarily need to do that, but I'm planning on it. Now I'm going into the champion chase saying, maybe I'm going to save 5 or 10 points on the champion chase. And that would allow me to also, let's say I got 5 fragments here, right? That means I would have 5 fragments to throw away, or like 1 more event to throw away. And I would probably go for this last artifact enhancement event, eliminate that. That's going to save me 20 million silver. That means I only need 40 million silver for the entire event. That's not too bad. Again, remember, this is a shorter fragment event calendar. It's only 14 days, not the 16 or 17 days we sometimes see. So I think silver is going to be in short supply for me. I don't have a huge pool of silver ready to go. I only have about 8 million silver or so. I typically like to start with about 20. So I'm going to be using my forge to get some additional silver. But if I can skip that ancient, I don't know why I keep saying that. If I can skip that artifact enhancement event at the end, I will. Okay, now for me personally, these 5 fragments from the Champion Chase tournament, I'm going to be putting some of those points on the board with my Lady Mikage fusion because I've collected all of the champions there. And so I'm going to be running them up during some champion training tournaments or maybe during this champion training event. And so I have tons of points. I can do this without shards. So if you can do this Champion Chase tournament without shards, then that's also another consideration. And again, remember, the 2x Sacred event is going on during that Champion Chase tournament. So now let's back up and talk about that approach instead. All right, so this is the summon rush we are going to try to avoid. We're going to save all of our Sacred Shards for the Champion Chase tournament. And we're going to have to get all 15 of the shards from the Champion Chase tournament. So just be aware of that. Again, if you can get any fragment champions or fusion champions done in the meantime, you can hold them and summon them during that Champion Chase tournament, and that's going to give you some extra points. But this means we need actually to hit every single event and tournament other than the summon rush. So this does mean the same probably 16 to 18,000 energy. So that's not too bad. But now we're going to need 60 million silver. So that's a little bit trickier. But again, if you have 20 million or 25 million saved already on day 1, then you are probably ready to go. The other option here is you could increase this value of energy by say 2,000 or 3,000 energy, maybe 4,000 energy. I would typically want to spend that in the spider tournament because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck in terms of silver return. So you can do this Dungeon Divers event entirely, all 5k energy into the spider tournament, maybe another 2,000 or 3,000 into the spider tournament. And that's going to allow you to complete this final artifact enhancement event. You're still going to need to find the silver for these first 2 artifact enhancement events, and that can be a little bit tricky. But remember, we're saving all of those sacred shards. That's the big trade-off. So basically, if you could say to me, hey, you know, for an extra 60 million silver, you can save 6 sacred shards or get 6 sacred shards. Would you do that? I would definitely consider it. Okay, so that is it for the fragment event calendar. I hope that helps you plan out your fusion event. Definitely let me know in the comments below. Have you decided to go for ZINOGRE Blademaster, or are you going to take a pass? Also, are you a fan of the Monster Hunter series, and did that weigh into your decision in any way, shape, or form? Or maybe it's FOMO. Maybe it's the FOMO that this is an exclusive champion that's going to go away and we'll never have another shot at her. Like I said, I'll be going for her on my main account, but I'm going to pass on my Noob versus Pro account. And I think that's probably the best way for me to go. But again, I'm at the point on my main account 2.5 years in where I can pretty much do every fusion easily enough. So one last time, decent progression champion, very good for Fire Knight, maybe usable as a generalized boss killer if you need one. But not going to be great in wave content. Okay, that is it for this one. I have been Colred. Thanks so much for hanging out, and I will see you in another video soon.